also want the developers to be a part of the entire product cycle, because I think that when you're more involved, you will also make your own part better.
I have Ester Daniel Ytterbrink from Chocolate Driven Development. Ester Daniel, could you tell me a bit about yourself?
Hi, I'm a developer who's been doing software development for like 15 years professionally. Then I started moving toward helping teams work better together, because that was the role that I took in the teams that I worked with as a developer. So now I do technical agile coaching, and it's a bit like Fab 5 or Queer Eye, but for software teams. So I know a lot about technical skills. I know a lot about collaborations. I've been in the product part of development, so I can help a team with the parts that they need help with, working together with them and making them the best team they can be.
And I saw on your website that you have exploratory testing for developers.
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a bit about what does testing mean to you?
Yeah, I tend to split it to two parts, where I think that one part is what's sometimes referred to as checking, when you want to see that the specification is followed. And I think that developers should be responsible for that part, and it should be automated so that it can be a part of a continuous delivery pipeline. And I also advocate test first, so test-driven development, because it improves the architecture and the design of the code. Then there's the other part. It's hard to write specifications, and there we need exploring. It could also be things that is hard to find with automated testing. And I think that we need testers for the exploratory part, and also finding where the specification was actually wrong, or finding where there are holes in the specification that the developers then couldn't follow. It's both the checking and the exploratory part. I also want the developers to be a part of the entire product cycle, because I think that when you're more involved, you will also make your own part better. So I want the developers to be part of the exploratory testing as well, because of ownership.
I'm curious, in your experience, how have developers or teams reacted when you've shared with them the idea of having developers involved with exploratory testing and have developers be involved earlier?
I think first sometimes they're reluctant, but that's because they're unsure of how it works. Developers are used to being really good at what they're doing, often, I think. And there's this idea that it's hard to be a software developer, so you have to be really brilliant to be it. And then you have to hold up that facade. And I think it makes it harder to test new things. I also think there's sometimes a hierarchy, that testers aren't seen as cool as good. It's a bit like the male-female thing. We have a dichotomy. We have developers and we're testers, and society thinks that developers are better. So it's hard to make developer do testing things. I think it's wrong. I think it's awkward, but it would be hard not to acknowledge that we have these ideas in our community. Or do you disagree?
I agree with you in the sense of you can have your own personal opinion about whether or not someone is better or if people are equal, but acknowledge that if you don't, that others can have different ideas or perceptions based on their experiences. So for me, I've definitely worked with people who've looked down on testers. I've also worked with people who've been open about that. That's another story altogether, when they're very happy to share those views. But then I have to remind myself that that's based on their experience or their past experience. As an individual, you can try and help change perceptions. Some people are open to changing their mind when they have new information. Some people aren't. But really, that's not a battle I always choose to fight. But it's something that I try to be aware of.
But I think it's a structural thing. And
what do you mean by that?
It's an idea that somehow lives on its own. It travels from person to person, like with the gender part, or with race, or that doctors are better than nurses. we all know that it's not true, but they get paid more and they have higher status. So I think it's bad, and it also makes it harder to introduce developers to testing, because if there's something that they're not comfortable with doing it because they're not used to it. They're used to being comfortable with what they do, and what you try to introduce is low status, or is perceived as low status, then of course you have a problem.
One argument I've heard about to have developers not do testing is around the fact it's hard to look at what you've been working on with a fresh pair of eyes or look at it critically. That's a common argument I've heard as to why someone else should be testing. So you said earlier that a developer should be responsible for checking. So for example, making sure that what they have built meets the requirements. But when it comes to exploring and seeing where are the gaps, I have come across the idea that it can be hard to do as a developer on what you yourself have built. What are your thoughts on that?
When I do structured developer exploratory testing, it's done in pairs, and at least one in the pair shouldn't have been involved in that feature. One thing I often do is that you have iOS and Android developers, and then you let them switch app. So they test each other's apps. Then they know the domain, they know the company, they know the feature, but they haven't worked on that code. Or they even might not be used to that operating system or user interface structure. At least one has to be not familiar with the code or the implementation. But the good part with having developers looking at the code from exploratory standpoint is that there are things that you can find easier if you're a developer. For example, with the iOS Android thing, if you know what's tricky when managing views and view layouts and rotations, for example, then there might be things that you would try that you wouldn't try it if you don't know that, okay, but if I do this and this, then this might be gone, and then that would be an error here. So I wonder if they caught that one in this implementation. So you can use your technical skills to find gaps. And I tried to gamify it so that it's actually, I think that goes to fix the hierarchy thing. You give the developers a framework. This is what we're going to do. These are your tasks. This is your script. This is what I expect from you. That takes the I don't know what I'm doing. This is scary part. And then you have this is low status. I'm not supposed to do this. I'm only supposed to do features. Can't we ship this offshore to be tested? You take that away by saying, this is a game. I want you to find as many defects as possible. Just try to do crazy things with the app and see if you can break it. And then hopefully that will then higher the status of exploratory testing and testers, because they will see that it's not that easy, especially not when you found a bug or something that is unclear and you need to figure out, how did I get here? What actually happened? How can I backtrack this? Is this a bug? Is it a hole in the specification? Do we know what is expected here? And suddenly you've got the developers interested in the entire process of actually writing specifications that are clear, that are thought true, and questions like, what is the user expecting here? What value do we want to bring? What makes sense in this scenario? Instead of just having them implement feature after feature, being bored, focusing on implementing a new framework instead of putting all that problem solving into the product and the value.
You said how you gamify that, and then developers then start to realize that testing might not be as easy as they initially perceived. Have you ever had people still resist because I haven't seen this problem specifically with developers, but people not willing to go outside what their job title states or what they're paid to do formally. So then, have you ever had to deal with someone who really pushed back, or even not actively pushed back, but kind of just didn't attend the meeting and ignored the email, or Because I found with no's, sometimes when people try to avoid something, they might not be so upfront to just say no. Like I said, how some people have the audacity to express their negative views about things, but then they never say yes either. Have you had to deal with that?
No, but it could be because of what kind of organizations I've been working with. It's been a lot of startups or smaller companies, not these. I haven't tried this when I've been in the big corporations. But I've heard people who've been on these big companies and used it, and they've used also the developer pride as part of it.
What do you mean by developer pride exactly?
When if you have this sense of wanting to compete and be really brilliant, if you tell the developers, and it's true, that if you do developer exploratory testing, there's a big chance that if they then do send this app offshore to a testing shop, they won't find any bugs that you haven't already found. And I guess that if you have testers in-house that are like real testers that know the product as well as you do, they will find things that you don't. But this not having other people finding your bugs unnecessarily, I think that could be a motivation. And also the benefits from the collaboration will be visible, because when you've done a session, you work in pairs, you record what you find. An important part is collecting everything afterwards. And then you also eliminate this bug ping pong thing when you say, I found a bug, and I say, no, you haven't. It's supposed to be like this. Or I can't fix it, and I say, I found a bug, and you say, oh, are you sure? I can't reproduce it. But when you're all in the same room, you've done the exercise together next to each other, and you find something, you can assign someone there in that room, and you have like a safer space for that. So I think it's easier as well to have developers take accountability for the code when they get to do it this way, and that the learning is different, because then everyone has seen that this thing happened and want to know, okay, now it's fixed. How did we fix it? Could we fix it? And then the code that they write will be better next time because they've actually actively learned from the mistakes. Yeah, I guess that if someone said, I don't want to participate or just didn't show up, I would hope that the positive energy from this awesome way of making your code better would lure them in for the fun.
People, I think, do observe how others seem to receive information or how the others react. So it's like if someone proposes an idea and then someone looks around and everyone seems to like the idea, and that's kind of like the bandwagon effect coming into play, where they go, oh, actually, maybe I don't want to be left out. So you've been talking a bit about developers and testing and how you get them involved with by gamifying it. Have you seen a difference between how developers approach testing versus how testers approach testing?
I think that some testers are unnecessarily afraid of technology.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah, so most automated tests or checks, they're code. And I hear people say, I'm not technical, I learned this. I mean, you said you're not technical on your YouTube channel. And I like, really?
I
Are
don't feel
you?
that's the weird thing. I don't feel technical. I feel like an analytical person who does technical things at work. It's just like I feel like I'm doing it, but it doesn't come naturally to me. So any technical skills I have gained, I feel like I've had to work so hard to get what I think seems to me it just came to others naturally. I like to talk to people. I like to analyze. I like to perceive and understand. But the actual creation aspect of test automation, all I can just say is it didn't come naturally to me.
Yeah.
That's how I feel. Yeah, I
Mm-hmm.
don't know what. Yeah.
And I think I understand how you feel that and how you think that. But I would say then that testing frameworks are generally quite bad then, if they make people who check all the boxes of being technical, if you don't talk about programming specifically, still feel hesitant when using these or feel that they have to work hard to make them work. I think that we have too many testing frameworks and they are too powerful, and that makes code worse.
How can they be too powerful? Or
They
like,
allow you
what
to.
does that mean?
We have testing frameworks in the industry that allow us to write really bad code and still have it being testable. We remove the test pressure from the code base, and that mitigates some of the benefits from having testable code. I mean, code that is testable has shown that it can behave in two contexts. It can behave in the context where it's used, but it also behaves in the context of the test. And then we have reusable code. And if we go up a bit and automate things that like UI navigation, a lot of those tools use the same things that screen readers and other accessibility tools use. When we add too much other stuff in it, then we don't really need to write accessible interfaces.
It seems to me you've come across lots of test frameworks that weren't well implemented. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah.
But then,
or how do
because for
you?
me, I had come across things that weren't well implemented. But then I feel like a lot of people don't know what good looks like. So,
Amen.
like, I was fortunate to have worked with people who are really good. And then for me, that then quickly became the standard because that's how I learned. And then eventually, when I saw what bad looked like, I could identify it. And then, you'd obviously have to be careful about sharing your feedback. But then realize that then just never got told that what they're doing could be done in a better way.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I don't know. That was just like a bit of a reflection. I'm not really sure where I was going with that.
Yeah.
Sorry.
But I agree with a lot of people not knowing what good looks like. And I would say that is both on like a technical level, how good code looks like, how easy it is to test, how easy it can be to maintain a test suite if it's written properly, how smoothly a tool should feel when it's well made. It's not always possible to find a well-made tool for all applications, but if you know what it feels to use something that is like intuitively right, it makes your life both better and sadder. But also how it feels to work in a good organization where you have developers and testers really working together, or sometimes even being the same person when you have like a cross-functional team where you collaborate really, really strongly and everyone is invested in what they do and really want the product to be the best possible. And that's like the only thing that is important for the team and the other teammates, of course, because you have to take care of each other. I mean, I wish that people could like experience that only for a bit, because then the entire industry would dream bigger.
It's what I said about like not knowing what good looked like it made me think a bit about with testability, how when you know it's a possible thing to ask for and you get, or to aim for, not just about what to test, but how do you make things testable, and to ask for like, how can I go about testing this sooner? Can you break it down so that I can give you feedback sooner? Then you really start to question things. And then tying a bit more to like team setups. So I came across the idea of psychological safety back in 2017. And oh my gosh, like once I discovered that, it's something that I'm constantly aware of, observing people. When I'm in retros, I've always thought you need that for an effective retro. Because if people aren't putting what they have in their heads on the table, so to speak, then the team isn't benefiting from what everyone saw happen. I just finished reading Crucial Conversations. and they talk about this pool of meaning, and when you're having this discussion, you got to like add things to the pool of meaning. And if you don't have psychological safety, then people aren't contributing what they have to the pool of meaning, so you can't all benefit from it. And that's one thing where, not just about like people don't know what good looks like, but like when you have felt safety and you've seen how people can be not just like vulnerable, like emotional, so to speak, but just being open and frank, then it's crazy how much you can achieve with team dynamics and, you know, having safety. But then when it comes to mistakes, so it seems to me you've worked on a different industries and different like contexts. What common mistakes have you seen teams make?
Not having proper retrospectives when we brought it up.
What do you mean by proper retrospective? And then
The ones,
how do they not have it in a proper way?
Yeah, I have a blog post on good retrospectives.
Okay, I'll link
Let's
that.
see if I remember the stuff that I said wisely once. But it's about having a structure to make sure that you get everyone's input. I use the Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great book a lot. It has 5 stages. You start with, we want to find the solutions or the suggestions from the start. I had a retrospective with the team today. It was 2 hours. We used 1.5 hours just to get all the data and get the insights for it. And then we used the last half an hour to find out what to do, how to do it, what experiment to run, and then wrap the retrospective up to conclude it. So there's, okay, let's go around the table and everyone says what is good and what is bad and what do we want to change. It could have been a suggestion box on the wall or everyone sending an email. It doesn't really use the collaboration part, the me saying something that you build on and then you saying something that I build on, and suddenly we get insights that we couldn't have gotten apart from each other.
So you're talking about how people build on ideas, and I have seen this not necessarily. I've seen this in retros, but also like in larger group contexts, where people don't openly agree with others, even though they secretly feel the same way. So what may happen is, like, let's say you and I are in a retro, and I say, I feel like people are not being responsive, and not like responsive enough over Slack, and that people, like, even though their status shows as say available, and you ask a question, that people don't reply, and then no one says anything. But then you had heard people complaining about the same thing. Do you have any ideas on how people can, like, what do you do in those sorts of situations where you know that you're not alone in that, or at least in that opinion, but then no one else verbally backs you up?
Mm-hmm. I have 2 methods that I think could help. One is that you vote with dots. It's easier to put a black circular sticker or a thumbs up if it's digital on something when no one actually pays attention or everyone's focused on all the post-its, than standing up in front of everyone and being the first one saying, I also agree. That's like a simple way, anonymous voting. The other thing is, do you know about liberating structures?
I've heard of it, don't know what it is.
Okay, it's a website where it's available. It's like exercises for workshops and stuff that you can use when you want to get more facilitation for less facilitating. You want to get information from a team or to flow inside a team, and there's a lot of exercises that you can use for that you can borrow. Or it's Creative Commons, I think. There's one there that is 1, 2, for everyone, I think, is the basic structure. And I saw on LinkedIn, like yesterday as well, that one of the liberating structure people stressed on the 1 in the beginning. So you start with on your own, writing down things. That gets the introverts and those who need to think before they speak. I tend to think by speaking instead. There's a difference. And then you do the 2, so you pair up and you tell each other. So the thinkers get theirs when there's only one person. I get mine when I get to talk to someone about it. And that's also a smaller group. So if there's a lot of people being bothered by Slack, it's only you and the other one. And if they feel the same, they can tell you. If they've heard someone, they would say so. If they have a different opinion, it's a smaller space where they can say it. And me having to talk to think, I don't have to take the time of everyone. I'm just taking the time of one person. And then you group up in a bit bigger group, and then you can consolidate. Like if everyone has the same thing, it's just one post-it when we're done. And if we want to prioritize, we can say that we're only allowed to bring one thing from this group. And then suddenly you can get input from a really big group in quite a short time. Creating those small groups, I think, could also make it safer for an idea to take root. If it's not a totally safe space, perhaps the smaller group can be safer.
If someone was very interested in what you had to say and they wanted to be able to contact you or read about what you have written before, you mentioned a blog post on retrospectives, for example. How can someone go about finding you?
I have my homepage, chocolatedrivendevelopment.com. So there's the offers. On the first page, there's also a link to my Calendly, where you can book an hour if you want to talk to me. That's a way to get really a lot in touch with me really soon. But there's also, I'm sometimes on Twitter. I'm a bit more on LinkedIn, actually. So I guess that's the best ways to find me. Email also works.
Sweet. And I'll include links below, along with your blog post specifically on retrospectives that you mentioned earlier.